Well, now we're learning more about Andrew Weissmann. John Solomon joins us with this breaking news. What do you got?
Well, if we take everybody back to the June of 2017, the summer of 2017, if we were all reading the mainstream media back then, we thought the Mueller investigation was chugging along and Donald Trump was in giant trouble, right? If you remember back that time. Now, if they were watching Hannity, they might have had a different story. But the public's perception was that the Mueller investigation was steamrolling ahead and that we were just weeks or months away from big indictments and the fall of the presidency. Behind the scenes, we now know that Andrew Weissmann and Robert Mueller saw their case crumbling, that the Steele dossier had been debunked, and that they had very few pieces of evidence left to even hint of any Russia collusion with Trump. And so on the second week of the Mueller investigation, what I'm able to document today is that Weissmann, not even moved into his new office yet, reaches out to a major Ukrainian figure who's under U.S. indictment since 2014 and basically says, I can wave my magic Mueller wand and make your criminal charges go away if you give me some dirt on Trump. Now, keep in mind, Mueller's not even staffed up yet. He's not even fully read into the case. And here is Andrew Weissmann trying to throw a Hail Mary plea bargain to a guy that's been under indictment for several years. And you'll learn in the course of the negotiations that in his behavior, Weissmann, in seeking a plea bargain and what is known as a proffer from the defendant, suggests the testimony that would be most helpful to him. The problem is this Ukrainian oligarch isn't willing to give that testimony, isn't willing to lie, isn't willing to make up any stories. So the deal falls apart. But what we find out is that Weissmann's motive for the deal might not only have been to get Donald Trump, which clearly was one of his motives, it might also have been to make a problem go away for the Justice Department. It turns out in the summer of 17, again, not public, the case against Dmitry Firtash, this Ukrainian oligarch, is falling apart. The key piece of evidence alleging bribery by this Ukrainian businessman is now deemed to be a fraud. And two of the key witnesses that the Justice Department used to secure the indictment have recanted their allegations. So behind the scenes, you have Andrew Weissmann, the ultimate fixer, trying to make a case go away that might involve DOJ misconduct and try to get a Hail Mary dirt play on Donald Trump. Neither one worked very well for him or for the Justice Department.
How does Mueller answer the question with a guy like Weissmann's track record, which is only getting worse with this new report that you're putting out here? How does he answer the question of why he only picked Democrats, why Andrew Weissmann became in control of hiring only Democrats? What part of this guy's record of withholding exculpatory evidence, causing Americans tens of thousands to lose their jobs, his losses in the Supreme Court, putting innocent people in jail, overturned, at what point is he not responsible for hiring a guy whose conduct is atrocious and his track record atrocious?
Well, that is clearly going to be one of the questions he's going to have to answer during Wednesday's hearing if it happens. And I think that it's very important for all the American public to understand, why did Mueller pick Weissmann? And I think one of the answers is Weissmann is emblematic of a period in the Justice Department history where prosecutors ran roughshod. All of the great stuff that you see in Sidney Powell's great book, License to Lie, Andrew Weissmann's the poster child for that cowboy version of prosecutorial pursuit. Aggressiveness, withholding, exculpatory information, all the things that we also see in the Russia case, right? Overstatement of the facts, which recently resulted in Mueller getting rebuked by a judge. Andrew Weissmann is the face of a Justice Department that was operating under the Obama years particularly, and then even going back into the Bush years when you saw the Enron case. And I think today the problem is that his conduct, not only leading up to the time when he was appointed to Mueller's team, but during Mueller's tenure, is going to raise a lot of questions. I think Andrew Weissmann has a lot to answer for. And the first question is, how could you 2 weeks into an investigation, before you even know anything, you're already throwing a Hail Mary plea bargain out there to a Ukrainian oligarch? And what sort of Justice Department brings charges against a foreigner and then finds out afterwards that its evidence was wrong, or that they misstated their evidence, or that their witnesses are recanting? There's a real question about the Obama Justice Department's conduct in this period. starting back when Firtash was indicted in 2014 and continuing to the advent of the Russia investigation. And Andrew Weissman is at the center of that machine. And I think Bob Mueller has a lot of questions to answer on Wednesday about
how do we
Weissman's
know
conduct.
so Weissman's 2 weeks into the deal. He reaches out to the American lawyers for this Russian oligarch, Dmitry, Firtash, and with a tempting offer, give us dirt on Trump in the Russia case, and Mueller might make the Ukrainian oligarch's 2014 U.S. criminal charges go away. Right. And you're saying that there's evidence that, in fact, he's basically telling them what they want to hear.
Yeah, there's very specific things. So the way these proffer situations go, and I've covered the Justice Department for 30 years, normally the prosecutors say, if you're interested in a plea deal, first off, usually it's the defense that comes to the prosecutors. In this case, it's the prosecutors going to the defense. Secondly, no matter how the conversation starts, the normal conduct of the prosecutors, these are the topics we're interested in. Let us know if your client has anything and make a proffer, an offer of testimony. Here, Weissman shares incredibly private details about what Mueller and his early thinking about the case is, and he's sort of suggesting what would be the helpful testimony, sort of leading the witness towards his proffer. And I'll give you a couple of examples that really jumped out to me. And what happened was that the Firtash team kept very good records of these contacts, so you would know. Let me give you one example, something that was not public at the time, but was clearly part of the theory. They're talking about this guy, Felix Sater, former FBI informant, somebody who made a lot of allegations against Trump. And Weissman's telling the Firtash team, we think a company tied to him called Bayrock was secretly investing in Trump's companies. That's not public information. That's not the sort of thing you should be sharing with a defendant at the time. They told him they were looking for dirt on Jared Kushner. Nobody knew Mueller was looking at Jared Kushner at that time. They told him that one of the groups that Manafort was working for might have been an illegal front, and that the Russians were trying to coordinate their work through this illegal front. None of that is public at the time, and yet it's being shared behind the scenes by Weissman to Firtash, a defendant in a criminal case, sort of giving him the idea of what Mueller needs to close these cases down. That's sort of what they call in the legal business leading the witness. And I think that when you see that behavior, it not only shocks some of the Firtash legal team members, it really raises questions among some of the legal experts I talked to in the last day or two about this, about the documents I have.
Yeah. All right, got to take a break. All right, as we continue with John Solomon, investigative reporter and executive vice president of The Hill. All right, so let's get your take, your preview of what you think we're going to see this week besides, they're going to try and put on a show.
Sure.
Schiff is already moving to discredit the Horowitz report, I noticed, before its release. Why would we ever, in the middle of a Mueller investigation into possible Russian interference in the 2016 election, why would we be more concerned about FARA violations and loan applications and old tax returns and taxi medallions, but not interested in what the New York Times is now suggesting was always Russian disinformation that Hillary paid for, that was disseminated to these hacks and conspiracy theorists like Michael Isikoff and the Washington Post and David Korn? Why would we care about that, not even ask a single question about a dirty Russian dossier, and that being the basis of a FISA warrant? There's no need to think about those things. How does Mueller answer that question?
It is a great question. I suspect that Robert Mueller is going to be a dud of a witness, much like Michael Cohen turned out to be a dud of a witness and, in fact, backfired on the Democrats as the very first witness in the House Democrats' new investigations. And I think the reason why is he's telegraphed why. He has said publicly he will not go beyond what's in the report. So I suspect you're going to hear Robert Mueller. Do you think
Mueller, as Devin Nunes suggested, may be coordinating with the House Dems about what he's going to say?
I have a strong reason to believe that Robert Mueller is going to stick to the words that he said after his press conference.
How strong a belief do you have? Because that let me interpret for our audience. Yeah. If John Solomon's, I have a strong sense, it means that he pretty much knows. So why don't you just tell us what you know?
I don't want to say I know because no one can predict a person's behavior until it happens. But my my reporting suggests that what Robert Mueller said a month ago, which is I'm not intending to go beyond what's in the report, is what's going to be the core of his testimony. And I think you're going to hear a lot of times, I refer you to the report, and I have nothing more to add to it. I think he's going to do that a lot in the course of the hearing. That's going to be frustrating to both sides. But I think the questions, particularly those from Republicans, are going to be enlightening. I think people like Devin Nunes, Mark Meadows, and Jim Jordan are going to ask questions while a national audience is paying attention. That's going to shock the American public because they haven't been able to hear all these things before. There's going to be real questions about the conduct of the Russia investigation and Mueller's team and Weissman. And
well, it's interesting.
The first time that many Americans hear that.
Look, if you want to stay, you're welcome. I have my questions. Jim Comey, the arrogant super patriot, put out his questions that he wants Democrats to ask, and I have questions that I want to ask Jim Comey. Right. And if you want to stick around and add to it and what questions you think Republicans can, you're welcome to stay. John Solomon, but I don't know what your schedule's like. All right, Executive Vice
President. 10 more minutes, would love that.
All right, great. Executive Vice President for The Hill, investigative reporter. We'll come back. My questions for Jim Comey, and then also my questions for Mueller. Well, me and John will put that together as we continue straight ahead.
This is the Sean Hannity Show.
All right, 25 till the top of the hour, 800-941-SEAN. If you want to be a part of the program, we'll get back to our top story, which is, it's Russia, collusion, stormy, S-hole, and now it's racist. They cannot stop themselves. Now, the arrogant one, the super patriot himself, James Comey, has come out with his list of questions and ideas for the House Democrats of questions that he wants. Okay, I have questions too, and John Solomon remains with us, Executive Vice President, investigative reporter of The Hill. I just jotted these down very quickly. We'll maybe put them up on the website today, but how about this? What does the espionage 18 U.S.C. 793 say? Then I'd put the legislation up. And say, what part of that did Hillary not violate? Why was the language changed, Mr. Comey, in the exoneration of Hillary Rodham Clinton when it was written in early May from the legal standard, gross negligence, and those words became extreme carelessness, which does not meet the legal standard? You talk a lot about questions you want answered about obstruction involving the president, but there's no underlying crime because we go directly to the Mueller report that says that they did not establish the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russian government in their election interference activities. So in the case of Hillary, there is the Espionage Act, and she did delete 33,000 emails, and she used bleach bit to clean up the hard drive so they couldn't be recovered. And then, of course, she busted up devices with hammers, had an aide do it, and they removed the SIM cards just to make doubly sure that no data existed or remained. What about those emails? Tell us how that's not obstruction of justice. And while we're at it, Mr. Comey, how many times were you warned about the dossier being unverified? We know of two instances directly. One was from Bruce Orr in August of 2016, and one was about 2 weeks prior to you signing the first FISA application, with the bulk of information being the Hillary Clinton bought and paid for dirty Russian disinformation dossier. So the question is, how many other times were you warned about the dossier not being verifiable? Why did you sign the FISA application using the bulk of information as Hillary's bought and paid for Russian dossier? Because when you signed it, you were swearing to the fact that it was verified. We now know it's unverifiable, as its own author says he has no idea if any of it's true. And when the counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign began, what was the basis for such an investigation, and why was there no investigation into Hillary Rodham Clinton and her bought and paid for Russian dossier with funneled money into a law firm to an op research firm that hired a foreign national? And last but certainly not least, Mr. Comey, you say the FBI doesn't spy. We don't spy. Your exact words. Well, when you signed the FISA application, the first one, and I believe you signed 3, well, weren't you putting your signature on a document that will allow spying into Carter Page and also simultaneously backdoor into all things Trump campaign later Trump transition team, and later the Trump presidency. How is that not spying? You want to add to that, John Solomon?
I got one more question for Comey. Did you knowingly and willfully leak classified memos to your lawyers as part of an effort to get a special prosecutor named? And if so, were you aware that you were violating the Espionage Act when you did so? We have strong evidence that he gave classified memos to his lawyers, and that the FBI scrub teams had to come back and scrub his lawyers' offices to make sure none of that sensitive information got leaked further beyond where it was sent to the lawyers. That would be a remarkable irony if James Comey, who preached to Hillary Clinton but refused to indict her, engaged in the same negligent handling of classified information as was uncovered in the Clinton email case. That's what I have for James Comey for sure.
Okay, now the next, I think, biggest and most important group of questions would be, and what would you ask beyond when did you, Robert Mueller, know? When did you know that there was no, well, I'll quote the Mueller report, that the Trump campaign, you never established the Trump campaign coordinated with the Russian government in their election interference activities. When did you know that? What would you add to that?
Very important question. I think the question you asked in the earlier segment is important. Why did you hire so many Democrats? Why so many loaded political people on your staff? I think from today's column, the one that's coming out tonight, did you know that Weissman was making this offer to the Russian oligarch? And why would you make such an offer before you were fully read into the case? Here's one of my favorites, and it's going to involve something that may come to light as early as tomorrow night. Who was Joseph Mifsud, the professor who approached George Papadopoulos in the earliest known interaction in the Russia collusion fantasy? Who is he, and what did you learn about him? And did you really do a thorough job investigating him? And then one of my favorites, if your mandate was to investigate all foreign interference in the 2016 election, why did you not look at the acknowledgement by the Ukraine embassy in Washington that Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic National Committee sought Ukraine's help in finding dirt on Donald Trump that it could make public during the 2016 election? And why didn't you look at the efforts of Ukraine's FBI and Ukraine's top anti-corruption lawmaker to publicly put out dirt on Donald Trump designed to help him lose the election? Isn't that election interference just like the interference you did not find on Russia? Those are all questions that I would ask Bob Mueller.
Well, I would go even a step further to Bob Mueller. You clearly had a very broad mandate that was given to you by Rod Rosenstein. Part of that mandate led to investigations into old tax returns, FARA violations, which heretofore were never really considered big violations. It was like, all right, get that up to date. Loan applications, taxi medallions. How is it possible, Mr. Mueller, that you put a priority on those items, but you knew, when did you know about Hillary's bought and paid for dirty Russian dossier? Did you know the Russian dossier was disseminated before the election into friendly media outlets that asked no questions? People like Michael Isikoff, David Korn, and the Washington Post.
That's right.
Was this in and of itself Russian interference in our elections? Did you investigate who paid for the dossier? Did you investigate whether any of the items in the dossier were true? Did you not find it important that the Trump campaign was spied on based upon what is, according to the New York Times, Russian disinformation? Anything else you'd add?
Those are fantastic questions, and I think one of the questions I'd ask him, if you were FBI director, if you were James Comey in the summer of 2016, based on the evidence that we now know the FBI used to go to the FISA court, would you yourself have signed that FISA, knowing that the Steele dossier was uncorroborated and the core allegation for the Steele dossier that they put in the FISA application, the one that Carter Page met with those two Russians, knowing that that was not yet verified? Would you have affixed your name to that FISA warrant? And I'll point out something that's very interesting. A lot of people don't realize this. The last renewal of the FISA warrant was issued and requested after Bob Mueller became special prosecutor in the case. But remarkably, he didn't sign his name to it. Rod Rosenstein did. Why, if Mueller's in charge of the case and it's now his case, why wasn't his name on that affidavit? And was that because he had concerns about what was in that FISA warrant? I think there's some great questions to ask about the FISA warrant. He's a man who, when he was FBI director, signed a lot of these. What if he signed his name the same way Comey did, knowing what we now know about the case?
Well, I think the next part of this is, did you have a conflict of interest the day before you were appointed to be the special counsel? Were you not denied by President Trump the position of the FBI? And did President Trump explain to you why James Comey, your friend, was fired?
Yep, that's another great question. I mean, listen, if we had Bob Mueller for 10 days, I don't think we could get all the questions in. And that is one of the most troubling things. Can you think back to a time where such a high-profile investigation was declared complete after the 9/11? You think of all the big investigations we've had in Washington the last quarter century, Watergate. This investigation left us more questions than answers, left us more concerns about the misconduct of the investigators and those investigated. It is a very difficult investigation, and Mueller's report was supposed to bring clarity to this, and instead it brought obfuscation and omission. I think that's going to be one of the themes on Wednesday that will be very important to listen for.
What about Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution? Do you believe under Article 2, as many famed lawyers and constitutional scholars believe, that the president had every right to fire you if he chose to do so? And the answer would be yes. Well, wouldn't that make any charges of the fact that the president at times lashed out at the witch hunt, that he still had in his power the ability to fire you but didn't? Doesn't that speak volumes about his desire not to obstruct the investigation?
Yeah, and remember, a lot of people forget this, but when James Comey was fired, everybody thought that was because of Russia. But we learned from the IG report, the independent IG, Michael Horowitz, a nonpartisan guy, that the grounds for firing Comey were not only not related to Russia, they were good grounds. They were solid personnel, human resource reasons to fire James Comey. He acted badly in the Clinton email case. He violated department rules. He usurped the authority of the Attorney General, and therefore he deserved to be fired. So if he was fired for legitimate grounds, how do you make the obstruction case after an IG has already determined that was a legitimate firing? Those are some of the questions that I think Democrats fear. I think they want to try to control this narrative, and I would watch for Democrats to try to cut off Republicans on the good questions, try to interfere with that, because they have a lot more to lose than to gain with Robert Mueller's questioning on Wednesday.
See, I agreed. All right, more with John Solomon on the other side. All right, as we continue, John Solomon with us with his breaking news story. We will have more tonight at 9 on Hannity on the Fox News Channel. He, of course, the Executive Vice President, investigative reporter for The Hill. Now, when you read Part 2 of the Mueller report and the different examples that it brings up, and they say they wouldn't go either way in making a decision, is there anything in that report that, to you, resembles obstruction? Now, keeping in the context, there's no underlying crime. Mueller found no underlying crime. He's the fourth separate investigation to find no underlying crime. Is a president that ultimately is innocent, because if you can't charge somebody, that means the evidence doesn't exist. Regardless of what you think, why did you contradict yourself on different occasions as to whether Department of Justice policy and the Constitution might have prohibited you from indicting a sitting president when you yourself said earlier and then later that was not a consideration?
Yeah, those are great questions. And if you read the second chapter, the second volume of the Mueller report, it is clear beyond what Democrats have been arguing that the only reason Donald Trump got off on obstruction is because there's an opinion, a long, old opinion, Justice Department, that sitting presidents can't be indicted. If you really read what Mueller wrote, he highlighted many of the problems with an obstruction prosecution, beginning with the fact that motive wasn't there. There was no underlying crime, as you rightly suggested. And in some cases, Mueller went out of his way to point that what looks like obstruction to Democrats might have simply been a president trying to defend his own presidency from an unnecessary distraction. So in Mueller's own analysis, contrary to what you hear from the Dems, what you hear on MSNBC, what you hear on CNN, Mueller cited the natural flaws that he ran into as a prosecutor when he started to look at this obstruction claim. And I think that one of the ones he doesn't mention, but may have been the single biggest reason why they didn't bring obstruction charges on the firing of Comey, is that the IG found that the firing was made for real reasons, not for Donald Trump's desire to get rid of James Comey in the Russia investigation, but because the president himself, because the department itself found James Comey in violation of its policies. And remember one other thing, there's that famous Lester Holt interview where all the Democrats always wave saying, that's the proof that Trump was firing Comey because of Russia. That's not what he said. If you read the whole interview, the part that wasn't put out publicly, you see the president saying, I want the Russia investigation to be done well, and James Comey, because of the way he handled the email case, is probably not a guy that's going to do it well. That's basically what the president was saying. He was firing Comey on personnel grounds, not on Russia obstruction, and that's probably the real reason that Bob Mueller never pulled the trigger on anything obstruction.
All right, John Solomon, we'll have this more on this breaking news story. Andrew Weissman, more news also coming from